Hello everybody, my name is Leonie Bockelmann. I work with Hauser Wirth here in Zurich. I would like to send a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today for our artist talk and walkthrough of the exhibition Matthew Day Jackson, Flowers, Windows and Thistles here in our gallery in Zurich. Live with us today is the artist himself, Matthew Day Jackson, and Randy Kennedy, who's our Director of Special Projects in New York. This event is closed captioned. If you would like to utilize this function, please use the icon at the bottom of the screen. Randy and Matthew will be accepting questions at the end of the conversation. If you'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A icon. So I'm delighted that you are joining us today, and I'm delighted to hand over to Matthew and Randy now.
Hi, everybody. We're coming to you from Zurich, and also from two locations in Brooklyn. About, I think, Matt, what, about 5 minutes apart? You're in Gowanus?
Yeah, I'm in Gowanus.
Yeah, and I'm in Park Slope. So we're here to talk about this body of work, and I sort of, Matt, wanted to start by asking you, as long as I've known you, you're an inveterate, restless, and, I think it wouldn't be going too far to say that an obsessive maker of things. And over the last 6 or 7 months, as you've been sort of required in a way to be more in one place than you normally are, and maybe not to have quite as many means as you've had before to make things, what is the whole isolation of COVID done to you? What did it do to you to, think about making work?
Well, I think that, that both of us have had a New York experience through this pandemic. And I think that it started, well, first I had surgery on my right knee 2 weeks before the lockdown happened. So I was kind of already social distancing before everybody else had. And I have multiple sclerosis, so I'm like more cautious about maybe making, I've been more cautious because of this. And the beginning started, on my back on a couch for 2 weeks. And then it just led to like an extraordinarily restless time. And I think that in the beginning, where we were thinking that this was a burden that we were all sharing, and only coming to know deeper and deeper with exactly how disparate our experiences are, depending on income or race or class or all these other things. It went from being really restless and the feeling like the need to make things to then making things made for a totally different set of reasons. But it started, I learned how to make beer. I made a couch because the couch that I was laying on was really, really uncomfortable. And it was made out of all the trash that I had left in the studio and an old IKEA bed that I had in storage. But I think that to make it shorter, my answer shorter, I think that the net positive has been that I've sort of recentered how I make things through this pandemic, and now. But yeah, we can get to more later. Did that answer the question, right?
Yeah, and we had spoken yesterday. But it's just occurring to me now, looking at you in your studio, and we're going to talk about these works that are based on the canvases are based on the shape of the capsule windows in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. But it's actually now just occurring to me that you're like one of the things that you're making, during being isolated is a series of windows, and I know that the metaphorical resonances of those windows go way beyond just the thought of a window. But it is actually interesting to me that what you pivoted to was to make windows when we're all kind of, we're all kind of indoors in a way,
I mean,
more or less.
yeah, when I was in graduate school, the first the first window that I made, I was really interested in how all of the museums were trying to make sense of the turn of the millennium. And at the same time, I was fascinated with Payne Stewart, the golfer who died in a plane crash, who actually died before the plane crashed. And so I made this window that was from based on the window that he would have sat next to prior to the airplane crash. That's a whole long story. But I think that to a certain degree, that my fascination with these windows, you know, which has never been about the technological aspect, but rather like, you know, like what does it mean to make a window in a spacecraft for a human being to look out into the darkness of space, or onto the, you know, in terms of Gemini and Mercury, you know, the sort of desired view was that of the moon seen out of the windows of the Apollo spacecraft. So,
Yeah.
But I think too, you know, that, and it's a shame, you know, which is sort of resonates sort of deep patriarchal macho attitudes of the people that experience these things, but the deep poetic, the absolute desolation of looking through these windows, and the sort of singularity of that experience are all things that I'm really interested in. I think that to a certain degree, artists that are a lot of times kind of sectioned away to a certain degree, and it's through that unique perspective that a lot of really wonderful things are made. And so it's all of those things, maybe.
Yeah, and I know that you have been interested in, you know, as sort of a subject and a framework for making work. You've been interested in the moon and the space program for a long time, and we've talked about this before. And your interest, as you just said, comes not really from a fascination with all of the sort of technological stuff that came out of that, but it is kind of in thinking about it as a poetic human endeavor to a degree, and also on the sort of the darker side of that, thinking of it as, you know, manifest destiny and new colonialism and the macho cowboy astronaut part of it. But the part that interests me more is that other part that's sort of about the weird magic that still happens within technology and science. And that seemed to me to be a little bit about what you were playing with and working with here with these windows, was that part of it, the weird part that still adheres to empirical science.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my interests were, you know, I think early on, recognizing how, you know, the battery powered or the handheld or the wireless, and how all of those things connect to, you know, like aspects of, you know, the lunar endeavor. But I think that I'm recognizing like how connected we are through these feats of technology and engineering that fundamentally aren't in our service, but rather really deeply bankrupt from war, you know, from like Buckminster Fuller's like Killingery, how connected we are to these industries of Killingery. And but I think that, sorry, it's a little bit loud here because there's like a auto body shop next door. So
Yeah.
apologize for the noise. But,
no, just quickly to back up a second, when you're talking about Fuller, you're sort of talking about the connection between all these things that have come out of the space program and the military being used for human progress, but also being used to slaughter people more effectively. Is that, I just want to sort of go back and, you know, talk about that a little more to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, early on, I was given a book. I was given a book by a friend named Steve Pullamud, who gave me a book called Bunker Archaeology by Paul Virilio, and how Virilio is really the gun, the camera, and the gun, the camera, and the airplane, all kind of, they were like triplets, going through adolescence and maturing into adults at the same time. And how those three things connected to one another really frame our experiences in relationship to each other, but also how we, how we control others. And I think that recognizing that those three things are so connected in our daily experience was something that kind of never lost its, it's always profound to me, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but it's, you know, I think it's like Buckminster Fuller, Rebecca Solnit, and Paul Virilio kind of all together that sort of beautifully frame a lot of my interests, I think, inspired by those three and thinking about these things.
Can you talk just a little bit so that the people out there who are looking at these in Zurich and in your studio about the elements that make up these window paintings? And I guess to preface that, also to say, like, just as a painter and thinking about the history of shaped canvases, had you always been interested in trying to take the three shapes from the three space missions and use them as as a frame for a canvas?
No, I mean, I think early on when I thought I was going to be a painter, when I was a printmaker, they were all weird shapes. They were all panels that were kind of stuck together. Early on, I think that there was like Ida Appelbrug and Mary Heilman were kind of my favorites at that time, and they had both been doing that. And it was like Yayoi Kusama as well. There's like this sort of idea about making a non-objective painting inspired by Ad Reinhardt. I felt that making a shaped canvas or making a canvas that didn't necessarily end at its physical boundary was a way of creating a non-objective painting. That was 24 years ago, but I think now I very much, I think that I thought a lot about Ellsworth Kelly, and I think about Ellsworth Kelly in relationship to abstract expressionism, and how, and so much of what I've made is really kind of squarely against the concepts of authorship, of ownership, of gesture, of like some kind of emotional thing that comes through in making painting. And I don't subscribe to any of those ideas.
Yeah.
And so, and so I think that by making a painting that's not rectilinear, that it really heightens its objecthood. And for me, I think that making these floral paintings for a while, and that the mechanics of making the painting are so simple, where there's a figure and then there's a background, that how pleasing that was to simplify making something, is that I wanted to push that further by taking the figure out and really placing it physically in the foreground and wanting to see what that looked like. The painting that you're looking at now on the screen right there with the orange and the white spill in it, was really, that painting I made 5 different times before we finally settled on this manifestation of it. And you can see in the exhibition that it's actually very, very different than the other pieces, but it was the piece that I had made and remade 5 different times to get to that point. So they were, but I think, like as I said earlier, like my first aircraft window artwork was in 1998. And so I think that it kind of never really left my imagination, I guess. So I wasn't planning on it, but I guess.
Can you talk a little bit about the frame, which is its own, sort of really here doing its own thing, and then the painting itself and the texture of the painting, which is you know, based on the surface of the moon. But you've got some, you know, these two things are really kind of working together here. Could you talk a little bit about that? Where the frame comes from?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm laughing because this like concept of working, you know, like does a painting or an artwork, you know, like work?
Yeah.
And so funny. Like
Some of them feel like machines, you know, paintings can feel like machines to me. And these kind of are, you know, working. Yeah.
Really bad machines. No. No, I think I'm just laughing because I think that so often I'm way more attracted to that thing. It's like that's dissonant, that's unsettled, that doesn't really, you know, that is sort of problematic, and it's in the things that I really love to live with. It's the things that I make. And I think that unsettled nature, I think that it particularly in these is something that I find super satisfying. And I think it's funny, like coming to this point of being satisfied is a place that I'm always really like scared of. But I think that in this time, like I really needed something that like felt good to me. You know, I think that we all share, you know, that in that sentiment. But what you're looking at, you know, is a sort of interpretation and part theft of Alphonse Mucha, who was a Czech artist who lived in Paris during the Art Nouveau. And I've always been attracted to his lithographs. The imagery is kind of not really that interesting to me, but in the technique, the economy of learning to draw with layers and how simple they were is really exciting to me in my sort of printmaking brain. But what really stood out in looking at a lot of it was just the reference to opium and to this kind, and it, you know, sort of got me thinking about filters and how the sort of constructed realities that we have and sort of live through that sort of blind us to the experiences of others. And I think, you know, there was something as I was working with them that became more and more important. And so in each of the works, it's the same kind of narrative. The roots, you know, like do like magic art fingers, like the roots are underneath, they grow into the opium flowers, and the flowers are burning, which turn to smoke and dissipate into the ether. And what the black that you're looking at are all abalone shells and mother of pearl, you know, which is like the shell material. And, you know, I like this idea of something that lives underneath the sand to sort of express an idea of something very, very distant and far away, but made kind of the same materials. But in that process of this thing turning to smoke, which is like a really intense opiate, and thinking about that the framework oftentimes is sort of intermediary between the space that the object exists in and the imagery or of the object that happens on the inside. And
is Art Nouveau the sort of like using Art Nouveau as a kind of a backdrop? I know you're interested in Mucha's printmaking, but is Art Nouveau interesting to you because of that kind of that almost like proto hallucinogenic, you know, thing that was happening in Art Nouveau, you know, before the 60s, before LSD? There was this kind of you know, super sort of trippy aesthetic going on with Art Nouveau.
Well, I mean, for me, I think that I'm always interested in where anthropomorphism, or like where we see a reflection of ourselves in something that it fundamentally is not human. It's a limitation of our ability to see climate change or to see or to have empathy for the experience of someone else. And I think that how the sort of lyrical wispiness of grass and opium poppies and smoke and clouds and sort of literally frame a lot of, particularly Muka's work, it was something that I was really interested in. And then on top of that, that there is like this Orientalist thing that really is fundamental in the Art Nouveau movement, which like so much of our inability to see our effect on our natural environment is connected to also our inability to see the effects of our behavior and how it is impacting the world around us and the people near us. And I think that there's, I think that so many of the things that we're, reckoning now are kind of about that inability to see outside of ourselves. And that inability, is not just this like human problem, but rather this idea that we're not willing to give up the way that we want to see the world. And I think that we're a week away from like a deeply scary moment. And and it's all in this inability to
sort of see the other.
Well, and to see ourselves too.
Yeah.
It's like that there is this sort of opiate fantasy that I think that Americanness is really, without it, there would be, there would be no America, I guess.
Yeah. There was this great, the California artist James Luna. There's this incredible thing that he said one time where he said, Americans are much more in love with romance than they are with the truth.
Yeah, totally.
And you think, there are wonderful aspects of that thought, but there are also terrifying aspects of that thought.
Yeah. We made, my friend Andy and Camille and I made an artwork with James in Wyoming, and his passing was really sad.
Yeah. His work is fantastic. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but can you talk about what's inside the frame in this, which is, the whole thing works together, but this is the surface here, which is the surface, if I'm correct, of the dark side of the topography of the dark side of the moon. But then in the actual making of these, the imagery looks almost like it's part of a natural process or an accident, or there is an effect in these that is sort of like it didn't come fully from the human hand, or if it did, the human hand just started it, and it's almost like a chemical process. And was that the effect you were going for to a degree?
I think, well, it's a number of things. And so I guess I'll just say what you're looking at. What you're looking at right now is all from a mold. So the paint is painted into a mold that has the topography, which has the negative topography of the far side of the moon. And so you're looking at paint, and then on top of the paint is clear resin, plastic. It's like a UV stable plastic. And then in that plastic, there's also plaid fabric. And I was trying to think of like what kind of fabric really sort of captures like reason, or like what does reason look like, or how to make sense of something.
Yeah.
So thinking about the grid and the wane, the weave of the plaid. For me, they came together in that way. And all of those are cast into a mold. And so I don't really actually ever see what it looks like, because I'm painting in reverse. It's like as if you were to paint, but then peel the painting off and look at the backside. And so there's that. But when I saw, it's funny, like I mentioned Ida Appelberg and Mary Heilman, who are both artists that show at the gallery. these were people that, these are artists that I was looking at, in my early 20s. But there's another artist that I've become aware of through the gallery, and Ed Clark's paintings that I saw when they were first at, on 22nd Street, I think. Is it 22nd Street?
Yeah.
That I was, my first inclination would be to not access these paintings, but I could not help but recognize how the material of the paint was left to do what it's kind of supposed to do, which is totally outside of the control of the artist, and how that I feel like I was really inspired by looking at those, and it was the first time of looking at sort of, forgive me, gestural abstraction that I was like, felt like I could read it, and felt like I was speaking a language that I understood. And I can't say anything smarter than that, really. So,
well, and there's another artist that I think you had mentioned in connection with these, which is Robert Smithson, and there's that work of his, Asphalt Rundown, that he did in a quarry outside of Rome, where he took a dump truck and let hot asphalt just run down this steep embankment. And I was reading a little bit more about that work yesterday, and he's talking about, part of that was thinking about what he called the crystalline structure of time, and that time doesn't really so much pass as build on itself, and was Smithson's idea about sort of entropy and decay, and the sort of the creative parts of decay. Did that play into your thinking at all?
I think that the thing that I was immediately attracted to, and I've known that work for a long time, since undergrad, and the haphazard aspect of it, and I feel like that my understanding of it, which it's my understanding of it, really captures, I think, it's like throwing cigarette butts out a window of a moving car, or deciding really not to recycle, so you just throw all the shit in the dumpster, or that there's this sort of like misanthropic kind of thing that I feel is like, I don't know, that was the thing that I was attracted to. And I think that in making a lot of the like color happen, that they're just like tossed up in the air, and then I just kind of let them fall where they fall. And I wasn't going out and buying paint colors. They were just paints that I had around in the studio for, in some cases, all the way since high school. Some of the paints that I've kept for a long time. So I wanted to have that, that sort of decision making that seemed kind of like, oh, we'll just dump it here, or we'll just dump it there. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And did you think about these, about wanting an effect of these to seem almost like, I mentioned this earlier, like like a chemical reaction, or either like an experiment gone bad, or something that's akin to the way an industrial process that creates something that we all use, that's functional for us, leaves these crazy traces, or junk or trash or pollution or whatever, that end up looking kind of like art sometimes. And when I look at these, and the fact that there's the surface of the moon, which you just instinctively that it's the surface of the moon, and then layered on top of that is this thing that kind of looks like this could have been the aftermath of a lab accident. It could have been something that grew here. It could have been, I'm wondering how much you were trying for that effect, or even if you weren't trying for it, how happy you are that it kind of ended up looking that way.
I mean, I think that there's, you know, these pieces were made kind of kind of in tandem with these other works that I was making that I'd shown in Somerset 2 years ago. And I was really interested in looking at images taken from ISS of Earth that showed sort of human interaction with landscape, but without able to see humans or any of our like constructed environment. So forest fires, or the first ones that I looked at that we all know really well are the oil fields burning as the Iraqi military is retreating from Kuwait in 90, right? And,
yeah.
you know, and they look like blood. Like if you've ever cut yourself underwater or seen Jaws, you know, the way that the pigment sort of flows into the water, these aerial views looked like Earth was bleeding. And from that, I think that what I was trying to accomplish was something akin to trying to create a landscape or like a surface that looked natural, but also like spending a lot of time, you know, taking people that I love to Yellowstone and going to Grand Prismatic or seeing any of the hot springs that, you know, either through algae or, you know, the minerals create these unbelievable colors that have been there for thousands of years. So it's all of those things.
Yeah, it's funny. This puts me just very quickly. I remember one time I was in Marfa and I saw, you know, there was a Carl Andre work that was one of the last ones. I think he had a sort of a direct hand in making, and there are these, you know, I think Corten steel lined up on these gravel beds, and the rain had come and the Corten had started to rust, and I interviewed Carl and I told him about the rust, and they were creating these, you know, sort of beautiful patterns on the Corten steel. And he said that he was incredibly happy to hear that that was happening, but that he was also incredibly happy that he didn't have any part in it, and that he'd never made a stroke of paint with his hand that he believed in. And and I know yesterday you were talking about the idea of the sort of, you know, the heroic expressionist gesture, the abstract expressionist gesture, and not, you know, not believing in that, or not really thinking of that as something you have a whole lot of interest in, and that the effect of these was to try to you know, oppose that or subvert that, the sort of the idea of the heroic gesture.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's one of my problems or one of my I don't know, maybe it's positive, I don't know, but I think that the restlessness that you were talking about earlier is that I feel like I'm like fairly consistently trying to undermine myself, and because I recognize that I too am like changing all the time, and early on I used to think of making sculpture, and one of the things that I would think about a lot when I was first making these sculptures was to think about how to make something that looked as though it was becoming rather than has arrived.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm a work in progress. And so
Well, it's funny, you know, I was reading an old interview of yours, or not that old, from maybe a couple of years ago, and you said, I think in some cases I am simply volunteering for one of my own studies. Which speaks to this to a degree, of you trying to see yourself. Yeah, of course you're a creator of these things, but also seeing yourself in a way as kind of subject to what happens.
Yeah, you know, I think you know, the thing that's interesting about the show is that this is the first time I've ever shown drawings, and really it's the first time I've ever actually like really sat down and made drawings.
Yeah, we should maybe move there, because I want to ask you about the Thistle
Cool.
drawings.
Yeah. But so like but just like as we're moving through there, if we could make a bookmark for talking about hemophiliacs and bleeding,
Okay.
hemophiliacs, bleeding underwater,
Okay.
rainbows, and
Okay.
sort of loss of dreams, like misanthropy. I don't know. You're the smart person. You can correct
I should make notes here because we should go back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back.
Hemophilia and bleeding underwater.
Yeah. Rainbows.
And loss of dreams.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's almost like if you could say it in German, it'd be almost an amazing Werner Herzog quote.
Exactly. Right. So maybe just for the viewers, I should preface this a bit by saying that these are how many are there, Matt? They're 100 and.
Oh, as of today, no, as of yesterday, I made one for a friend. We traded some shoes that she made some really totally amazing shoes, and she wanted a drawing. So I've made 105, but there's 100 in the show.
And these are all these are all drawings on collected letterhead, most of it coming from corporate America, but some of it there was one like a bush quail election letterhead. So these are kind of drawings on found letterhead that bring their own history to the piece of paper, and they are technically they're all thistles, but they are sort of phantasmagoric and in some cases disturbing and darkly comic thistles growing out of let me see if I got this right. Growing out of a bucket that is a representation of a bucket that was used to mix the poisonous Kool-Aid in Jonestown in Guyana, where the cult leader Jim Jones murdered dozens and dozens of people.
Yeah, 900.
Do I have that correct?
Yeah. I think that. Okay.
So it's a long way of saying these bring a pretty tough history to bear. I mean, these seem to come out of a place of some, sort of anger and a pretty close up look at some pretty grim parts of history.
Yeah.
Recent history.
I mean, I think we had I had some letterhead in the studio. I feel like it might have been the Apollo one, the 25th anniversary General Electric letterhead, and I started drawing one of those. But those were just flowers. But I recognize, that thinking about like Martin Kippenberger, who I've always loved that work. I think one of my favorite works,
the one that he did on hotel stationery.
Yeah, it was just like a thing that he did when he was like in whatever fancy hotel that he was staying in. But I've always loved Happy Ending to Franz Kafka's America. That central installation is fantastic. And for me, I think that the letterhead of the hotels were kind of like placed him in a particular environment that you could imagine Kippenberger making these drawings, like sitting on the edge of the hotel bed where he maybe pulled the desk over while he's watching TV or whatever. And I feel like how that talked about the artist and the place that they live, that he lived, was kind of fruitful, especially when I found this letterhead. And it kind of ties to what we were talking about earlier and how the industries that make the rockets and the modules and the technology, all the stuff, are also at the same time making missiles, warheads, and the technology to deliver them both with great efficacy. And I think that how this letterhead talks about like the sort of space that I feel like I occupy, that all, I think I'm saying kind of all of us occupy, is kind of, they connect in that way.
And were these letterheads sort of collected? Was this sort of like late night eBay trolling to try to find letterhead that you thought resonated for you in a particular way, given a history of a company or a product or a political campaign?
Yeah, and like, whether it's like General Electric or Standard Oil or, Hughes Aircraft or, they're all fundamental in creating this reality that we live in. And I think that but really, in the most honest way, the drawings were like therapy. And I think that
maybe we could, in Zurich, maybe we could just sort of go in close on a couple of them so people can see how the actual, these letterheads themselves are kind of,
that's a donut, ice cream cone, and a dildo.
Right. The sort of the corporate identity that these logos communicate it brings their own history to it, and then often it's layered over with, a severed head. Is that from Goya's
Disasters of War?
Disasters of War, yeah. And I'm trying to remember, what did Fairchild do, or what has it done?
Fairchild is morphed into like a kind of nondescript entity that works on a myriad of defense projects. And
okay, they're a defense contractor.
Like, there's not a particular thing that I can think of that I can point at, but rather being fundamental. It's kind of like, who is the company that was like, we don't make the BASF or 3M or DuPont or
like a holding company or a
fundamental parts of
right.
And I think that early on, my interest in Draper Labs and DARPA and how the organizational structure of DARPA is kind of like really one of the reasons why there's been such a kind of radical over the last, the 20th century, like really radical developments in terms of technology. And it's all built into how they organize themselves. Anyway.
Right. And when you talked earlier about how, in a way, you felt like these drawings were therapy. I mean, this one is obviously, incredibly topical. And wait, it's on Harley Davidson stationery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so like one of the things that we're experiencing right now, right, of like Make America Great Again,
yeah,
or, Lock Her Up, or whatever fucking crazy, QAnon,
crazier by the day.
It's like, but the thing is, like the 1% and like this concept of like the angry white dude really like marketing to that demographic is fundamental in creating like the Harley Davidson as an American motorcycle company.
Yeah.
This kind of concept of the cowboy, of like having like free reign of the American open road.
Yeah.
Also, it's like Marlon Brando, what's the,
right.
I think there's like, so the Fuck the World, FTW, all the Harley Davidson ones have like Dilligaf, which is like a biker acronym that means like, does it look like I give a fuck? Or FW, which is Fuck the World, or God, there's another one. But it's like I know the sort of cultural heritage of that.
Well.
Yeah. And I think that it's like one of the places that, I mean, you can see from like the way that I'm visibly bothered is like, oh, fuck it. Those are flies. The flies are making the signs, are making this anyway.
And did these feel therapeutic in a way of like of actually, of exercising some of pushing back against these histories, or just exercising some anger and frustration? And
I think that really that there is like I think that a lot of people have been experiencing this lately and recognizing the total bankruptcy of virtually everything around us. And I think that it's like, what do you do with it? Do you go out into the street and yell? Yeah, sometimes you do. But then there's also like in our private moments to organize like how we feel and certain aspects of helplessness. I think this is going to sound totally trite and lame, but I think that to a certain degree, I mean, so lucky that I am able to make stuff where I can see the resonance of the way that I feel, and have like a record of that experience. And so in making these drawings, I think,
And this one that we're looking at now is Elon Musk, right?
yeah, impaled on like a giant suction cup dildo.
He under the Hughes Aircraft Company
Yeah.
logo.
He's like a contemporary Howard Hughes.
Have you've not engaged in this sustained a period of just drawing
No.
in a long time or ever?
No, I think it ties into this concept of not believing in like gestures as being truly expressive of one's emotions. And I think too that I never really felt like I should make drawings, because then they start to get too close to like wanting to create a visual language that is unique to me, when I think that I don't like that. But in making these, I recognize that I do like have a way of making things that I enjoy, and that's okay.
And did you start these and then they kind of became like a fever, like you just felt that wanted to keep doing them? They kind of have that feeling to me of something you started that then possessed you.
I think it started where I made a couple of them, and people around me, my kids, Laura, they thought that they were cool, and that felt good. I think that having validation from people that I care about is important, and I think that to feel good, that is okay. And so I think it was about that validation. There's another Harley Davidson one. That's a chicken nugget. No, that's a tater tot, a 1%er badge, and like a lucky number 13 badge, which is like all biker shit. And but I think, I think even like when talking to Madeline, I don't know if she's watching this, I think that when she was like, oh, these are great, these are like, we should show these, I was like, oh, really? Cool. And
you mean they almost felt like a private exercise to a degree?
Yeah, but then when people respond to them, it's like I feel responsibility to share things, but also at the same time, it just feels good to have people like them.
Yeah.
And
what does you talked about this being a thing for a long time, which I was not aware of, but that bucket, the Jonestown bucket, that's something that's figured in previous work, and it's kind of like a touchstone or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that early on, I think my first show in 2005, there was a lot of doubling of Jim Jones and Ronald Reagan, and the Brandenburg speech in the last hour of the Jonestown Temple. And, and I think that I just saw this like kind of masterful use of lying and this duplicitous, using people's faith to do, in a lot of cases, unspeakably horrible things. And
yeah,
and it's tied into like freedom and all these other things. I think, I would not suggest this, but to listen to the Brandenburg Gate speech and then listen to the last hour and a half of the Jonestown people, and the way that there's like this, I think that those of us that grew up at the end of the Cold War, where we saw, the concept of making something so horrible in order to keep ourselves safe from something so horrible is crazy. And,
yeah,
and I think that idea of, written large is like if I can't have it, then no one can. And if we're going to end this thing, then it will be on our terms, and this like mutually assured destruction. you know, is like a suicide pact. And
Right.
we live in such an extraordinarily violent country, where we've perfected the intonations of how to express that violence the world over is something that is perennially disgusting, and that it's embodied in me.
Yeah.
It's part of like how I've become the man that I am living in this particular place. And I think that through all of it, you know, how do you exercise that? And
Yeah.
it's something as stupid as making drawings on a piece of paper, but you know.
Right. And the image of the thistle has, I know, like in those bronze sculptural works that you made a couple years ago, that thistles were a part of these sort of reclining figures surrounded by thistles. So is the plant, the thistle, is something that you've been kind of ruminating on to a degree as a structure to hold ideas and images?
They're walking to Phelps Lake from Grand Teton National Park, that around the parking lot are all of these thistles. And as you walk up the trail, the thistles are really close to the edge of the trail. But as you go deeper into the forest, the thistles dissipate. And it always struck me, you know, the thistles are extraordinarily tough plants. They can grow kind of anywhere, and then once they've found a place to land, they kind of take over. They're incredibly difficult to pluck out.
Yeah.
You need to have gloves and a shovel oftentimes, because if you don't get the root deep enough, then they come back. And I think that there's like this sort of cultivation of things that we cannot free ourselves from, like this thing that we're talking on. And that sounded like a moron, but you know, I think that we're entrenched in a great many systems that we'll never be able to free ourselves from. And I think that's like part of the heritage, that like a tremendous, you know, sort of technological sort of explosion, you know, to travel to the moon and send electronic letters to each other. How right now we're sharing this information with Zoom. And as we share our memories on, you know, social media platforms, we're co-owning those media, you know, that data with giant corporations. And I think that that's like, you know, thistles that you can't pull up. And so I think the thistle, you know, but it's also at the same time, to speak anthropomorphically, it's like I kind of find them so beautiful at the same time.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that it's more complicated. And I think that in making the drawings too, like I just wanted to make something that I didn't have to plan out really.
Right.
I wanted to make some from Earth and some from the moon, to talk about the envelope of our physical encounter with land, whether it's lunar land or Earth land.
There's some questions that have come through, but I wanted to circle back to the topics that you were talking about when the camera was heading to that room, which was, and how hemophilia plays into which of this, where, how?
Well, not so much in the drawings. I've thought a lot. In 2006, I did a project where I lived in a van for like 4.5 months and took pictures of rocks that looked like people. At the same time, I was going to these historical sites that I felt were not history sites, but rather akin to like wounds on a hemophiliac that just keep bleeding and bleeding, that will never scab over. And, you know, I think that there's like that concept of like a wound that doesn't heal is something that's very much a part of the three of the large floral works that are in the other room. And and so I think that it's in connection to that. So if they want to go into the other room, or did you want to keep asking about drawings?
Well, no, yeah, actually, I think that would be a good way, because we've sort of seen bookends of this, and then we could talk about those. And I don't fully follow that in a way these flower paintings have that kind of metaphorical underpinning of like a wound that won't heal to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, that is for sure from the subject matter. I agree with that, and I think that the things that I'm always critical in the work are things that I embody, that are entrenched within my being.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I kind of show up a lot in the work, my scale or hand, or like the actual image of me. And things that, it's like of my close environment. Like, for instance, like in the painting that we're talking about, that we're looking at right now, the pink on the ground is the same carpeting that my feet touched every morning when I woke up from bed in the home that I grew up in. And and I've made a lot of work about that carpet and that space, both a transformative space, but also a space that absolutely needs to be kind of redone. So, but in terms of the hemophiliac, in the three large works in the show that have this sort of rainbow, I'm not gonna qualify what I was gonna say, but I like thinking about the rainbow and what it means in relationship to the Mattachine Society, or Jesse Jackson, or like the Rainbow Coalition, or goodness, or like the
Right.
And I like thinking about that thing bleeding through a wound that can't heal, because it's not all negative, but in these cases, I think that I kept imagining what a rainbow would look like if it was bleeding underwater. And so wanting to make these spills in this way that would kind of conjure this image of a rainbow, while at the same time, allowing it to hold some of its like structural integrity, so that it's still spectrum, but at the same time dissipating into this ether. And what was happening is it like creating these backgrounds that were at once the surface, like an actual surface that we can locate to a particular place, the moon, but also at the same time like becoming kind of illusory and far away, and but also iconographic. So it's kind of three things happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
Really interesting, and is for the work that's coming up. And there's one work that's in the show that's made at the very, very tail end of making the work for this show, that has really blossomed into like some really, really exciting things.
And it seems like with all of these, you're taking these sort of standard issue tropes of beauty from art history. I mean, almost cliched: rainbows, flowers, pinks, things like that, and then trying to figure out what it's weird. There's that great quote from Walter Benjamin, where he says something like, every document of civilization is at the same time a document of barbarity. This is how we understand the angel of history. It's sort of what all of his work was about. But looking at those makes me think of that as, and all of these, everything we've looked at so far is to a degree about that push-pull between progress and horror that human beings just seem to do, and the flower works do that in a kind of a weird, more subtle way, but you get this edge of, as you say, of the wound or bleeding or something about to go wrong in these to a degree.
Yeah, the making the show was very exciting from the standpoint of how much of it was made like really like in elements. Like over the summer we had fire and we had a flood and there are helicopters flying over the city all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and going to protests, and then this like using like trash from the studio, the sort of leftover remains, to make a lot of the images that we're looking at, and creating something that doesn't really look like any of that happened is, I don't know, it was a really exciting, but,
Yeah.
but I think, go ahead.
Let me, just because we're starting to run a little short in time, let me, there's a question from Anonymous, which is just, would it be, and this is a pretty interesting question, and it's really talking, I guess, more about the window paintings. Would it be true to say that some of your thought processes in the creation of these works are connected to the possibility of actually leaving the planet and searching for alternative survival strategies? And then this questioner also added, the flowers feel similar to some of the deep space pictures, and the poppies to the imagery of comets. Anyway, I would like to hear what you have to say about that.
I think, you know, going back to Werner Herzog, I feel like, so there's a constant recycling of imagery in the work. And I think, you know, whether it's like a skull or like a rainbow or flowers or something, and I feel like I'm not ready to move on to something that I haven't seen before, because I feel like there are so many things to mine from our past in order to really understand them so that we can move forward. I just don't. So in terms of like thinking about these windows as like a place to go, I think that it's actually, they're actually windows of places that we've already been. And I think that, I don't want to do the algebra of that, but if you take Smithson to what I just said, and considering that this is like maybe the window of a very ornately, you know, ornately crafted spacecraft, that this spacecraft has maybe been there many thousands of times.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, I don't want to, you know, it's like that. It's more fun to think about that than to draw
right.
it up. And so I think that for me, you know, this concept of, you know, creating a lunar base so that we can, you know, the excitement of, you know, finding water on the moon is, you know, in this sort of excitement of creating a lunar base so that we can more easily travel to a place like Mars. And I am like, you know, so what, do we inhabit Mars by creating a nuclear detonation to create particulate matter to block out the sun, to trap greenhouse gas, and so to inhabit Mars? Fuck no.
Right.
You know, it's like,
right.
What if we, like, I'm like, there's a lot of goodness in humanity. There's a lot of goodness, but I can't say that we are really trustworthy.
Well, I mean, that might be in a way like my final question of this is, when you look at all of these pieces together, which have been made in a pretty compact period of time, do you feel like they came out of a place of hope, or of like a kind of a you know, maybe a sort of a mounting pessimism on your part about what we're able to do? And also, these were being made during a very compact period of time that was, you know, sort of, to not overuse the word, but unprecedented, and coming up to what's about to happen in 6 days with this election. So they're colored to a degree by, you know, a very pivotal time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I am deeply optimistic. I think there's something that really struck me over the last, I can't remember like really where it like crystallizes it. There is progress always. I believe this, and for me to naysay any of that progress is to not respect any of the sacrifice and really fucking hard work of a lot of people. And so for me, I want to look to images that have been made and to forms that have been made, and to extrapolate meaning from them so that we can truly understand an aspect of our past so that we can then move forward into something better. And I think that the amount of energy and the amount of work is only expressive of a deep optimism. There's no pessimism.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
Like American exceptional, like there's none of that. It's really into this, that you wake up every morning and you have to do good work to affect positive change. And that is a statement of an optimist, not a—
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So the last question that just came in over the transom was, this is, you know, addressed to you, is the artist a misanthrope himself? But I think you just answered that question. Say you're not, this isn't coming from a misanthropic position. It's coming from one that actually thinks that might be able to save ourselves.
I think, no, you know, you know, it's a funny thing. I might be wrong, but I'm going to die trying. So.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that's all from my side of Brooklyn. And so, Matt, unless there's anything you want to add by way of a closing statement, I think we'll bring this to an end.
No, I think if anybody, you know, I don't know who's watching this, but I appreciate your time to spend listening to us. And then also, I think this is probably my favorite show that I've had at the gallery. This is number 7, I think. And making this work with the people that I work with in the studio has been supremely, like, really beautiful. And I'm really lucky to be alive now and able to do this. So,
well, I wanted to say thank you for doing this in the middle of, you're deep into moving your studio from one place to another, which is like moving a couple of mountains. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this, and thank all my colleagues in Zurich and in Los Angeles putting this together, and in probably a couple other cities that I am not even remembering right now. So, and thanks to everybody for watching, and stay tuned to this channel, as they say. All right.
Yeah. Next time we'll talk about the flowers.
Okay. Right. Yeah, we didn't talk about loss of dreams, but we'll pick that up next time. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.